A few months ago, I started my first job as a doctor, and I realized that this was a huge milestone in my life. And it's not because it was my first job ever, but because it was a milestone that marked 10 years of my commitment to medicine. Because I applied to medical school at the age of 21, and now, 10 years later, I'm starting my first job straight out of residency at the age of 31. And I'll admit that after spending 10 years studying and training, becoming a doctor was not everything I had dreamed of. And if my boss is watching right now, please don't fire me, because I can explain. So I wanted to become a doctor for many reasons, but I would say that the biggest reason for me was that I just loved to learn. And throughout my journey, this love for learning was what pushed me through the difficult times and motivated me to keep going. And hopefully by me reflecting on the last 10 years of my life and sharing this with you, maybe you'll feel inspired to pursue medicine as well. Or maybe you'll just lock in your decision to turn the other way and run. So it started when I was 18, just starting out college, not really sure what I was doing with my life. I just knew that I loved science and I loved to learn. And at the time, growing up Asian, you can't help but hear everyone around you telling you to become a doctor. And luckily for me, I had the grades and I had the work ethic and I shadowed doctors and I saw what a rewarding life it could potentially be. So all those things made it an easy decision. Now, I remember that I had some Asian friends growing up whose parents really wanted them to become doctors too, but their heart wasn't in it and they had other passions. And I remember hearing about all the arguments that they had with their parents. And I remember thinking how lucky I was that my career choice lined up with my values and I wouldn't have to spend my 20s figuring it out. This is a big deal because since the path to becoming a doctor is so long, if you decide to apply to medical school in, say, your late 20s or in your 30s, although I know some people who did do that, it can really interfere with other parts of your life, like settling down or starting a family, or your parents growing old, or other life events. So in college, I chose to major in biology because some of the knowledge would actually carry over into medical school, like biochemistry, physiology, and neuroscience. But other classes, like organic chemistry, for example, where you draw chemical structures and you move shit around with arrows, such a useless class, like so useless. Organic chemistry, physics, calculus, like I haven't used any of that information and I'm sure I'm not gonna use them ever again after college. Unless I have a kid and I have to teach my kid organic chemistry. Actually, you know what? I take that back. So this is kind of a tangent, but my dad has a PhD in organic chemistry. Just saying, if you want your kid to become a doctor, you better not sleep on organic chemistry. Anyways, having good grades isn't enough to get into medical school. You had to bring more to the table. You had to show that you're well-rounded, that you've got the curves. I spent time working at a local emergency room. I did a lot of research, with the microscopes and what do you call those things from Breaking Bad? Beakers.
Oh, Beaker, you forgot the beaker. Now, get the beaker, Beaker.
Beakers. We studied ovarian cancer in mice, so while you were partying on the weekends, I was in the lab doing pap smears on mice all day long. I was 21 years old when I applied to medical school. The application cycle takes an entire year, and at the time I was just finishing college. I had nothing to do, so while waiting for interviews, I decided to do a 1-year master's program studying global medicine. Remember, because I like to learn. I knew that I wanted to stay in the medical field somehow. Plus, what the hell am I gonna do with a bachelor's degree in biology, right? But to my surprise, this program really opened my eyes. You see, in America, our common epidemics are obesity and diabetes. But in other countries, it's completely different. They have diseases that we don't even see much, like tuberculosis or AIDS or vitamin deficiencies because of lack of food and resources. We also learned about public health and how governments come together to build sustainable solutions for global health issues. And at the time, I was having so much fun learning that it was all kind of just a blur. But I do remember getting my med school letter of acceptance, and the first person I called was my mom. She was so excited to hear the news that she dropped her phone, and I could hear her screaming to her friends on the other side. Like, she was running around yelling like, "Oh, my son's gonna become a doctor." And I just remember she was just so happy. So now I'm in medical school. I'm 23 years old, and learning is just on another level. Doctors love to use that analogy where they say learning in medical school is like drinking from a fire hose. It just sprays you in the face, and you gotta take it in as fast as possible without drowning.
Turn it on, I'm very thirsty. Nice job, Chris. You got my shirt wet.
I'm not gonna lie, I was struggling big time, and I knew that I had to make changes to my study habits or risk flunking out. So what I did was I started exploring neuroscience, psychology, cognitive behavioral science to understand how the brain works and how it retains information. And it literally changed my life. Long story short, I learned how to learn. I'm not gonna go over the details in this video because we already have so much content on learning. Practically our entire YouTube channel. We also have a free online study course, and we even built a free note-taking and flashcards app for you. Have at it, guys. The bottom line is that learning how to learn not only got me through medical school, but it set me up for success later in life. So in the first year of medical school, you continue to build your science knowledge with pharmacology, genetics, microbiome, and of course, the notorious anatomy. As medical students, we got the unique experience of dissecting actual human beings, or cadavers. It was so spectacular and humbling at the same time, and horrifying. I remember one of the cadavers was this morbidly obese guy, and we had such a hard time locating all of his organs because they were just all coated in fat. I mean, his heart, his liver, his blood vessels, they were all covered in a film of fat, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And I was never more motivated to go to the gym and clean up my diet that year. Speaking of big scares in medical school, I couldn't tell you how many times I contracted medical student syndrome. Basically, it's a phenomenon where you scare yourself into thinking that you have every disease that you happen to be studying. For example, when I was reading about, I don't know, brain cancer or something, and it says common symptoms include headache, dizziness, and loss of appetite, I would get so paranoid, and I would think, oh my God, I have headaches, dizziness, and loss of appetite all the time. So do I have brain cancer? It's just this unproductive loop of worrying and self-diagnosing, and it just means you're a medical student. In second year of medical school, we started to introduce more hands-on learning and more patient care along with our usual classroom lectures. We had these routine workshops where the med school would hire actors and actresses from the university drama department, and they would pretend to be our standardized practice patients. And some of them were incredible. Like, I remember this one guy who pretended to be a schizophrenic with psychosis, and he was acting just like the Joker from the Batman, and we would have to go into the room with them and use our medical knowledge and bedside manner and empathy to complete the objectives and help them feel better. So during second year, we also developed clinical skills like doing a physical exam, using a stethoscope, interpreting x-rays and EKGs. And I remember one of the things we had to learn was how to draw blood. And it's kind of funny because nowadays, I don't know any doctors who actually draw their own blood, like with a needle. That's usually the phlebotomist or the nurse's expertise. But anyways, during our workshop, we were all paired up with partners, and we had to practice drawing blood on each other. And my partner was great, super skillful, in and out like a vampire, took my blood. I didn't feel anything. But when it was my turn, oh man. See, I had the needle, and I went in a little too far and I poked through the vein and I went out the other side of the vein, and I gave my partner a giant welt on his arm, or what we like to call a hematoma. Man, it was bad. It looked like someone had shot him in the arm 10 times with a paintball gun. Then in third year of medical school, that's when we actually do our clinical rotations and interact with actual patients. That's when they set us loose into the wild and allow us to wreak havoc on the hospital. But seriously, that's when things start getting serious, because we have to figure out how to work on a team and still be enthusiastic about learning, yet still be respectful of the seniors and attending's time. And after a long day's work, you still gotta go home and study, because we still have exams at the end of each rotation. For me, I would say surgery was the hardest one, because we had to wake up at like 4 a.m. in order to get to the hospital in time and see your patients and prepare for rounding and for the OR. The work itself was not exactly easy, because learning in the classroom is entirely different from actually putting your knowledge to practice. Medicine doesn't come at you with multiple choice questions like it does in the classroom. There is a real life human being sitting in front of you with real problems beyond just physical pain and suffering. It was a lot to take in. There were many days filled with self-doubt, thinking about having to take on responsibility for someone else's well-being, and there were other days where I was just too exhausted to be doubting myself. But there was one thing that still kept me moving forward, and that was curiosity. It's the need to just figure it out. Like, I'm telling you, one of the best cures for sadness is to just learn something. I found that I could get through the tough times if I just kept my mind preoccupied on something as positive as learning and growth. So you can see the amount of learning that I was doing, and I was enjoying it so much that I decided to apply to business school during medical school. I'm not kidding. I did some interviews and got accepted into the dual MD MHA program, which extended my grad school by a year for a total of a 5-year program. The MD is your typical medical doctorate, and the MHA stands for Master of Health Administration. So while I was studying medicine, I was also taking business courses like finance, marketing, leadership, but these were all specifically catered to the healthcare industry. It was really helpful for me to see where the doctor fits into the grand scheme of things when you include hospitals and pharmaceutical companies and health insurance and public health policy. This really opened my eyes to the idea of being a physician entrepreneur. So by the end of medical school, I decided to apply to residency in internal medicine and eventually specialize in hospital medicine. At this point in my life, I was 28 years old. I had just graduated medical school, and any other doctor in my peer group would have started working by now, but I, for whatever reason, had 3 degrees. I just love learning. Well, it's not all that, because I remember thinking, wow, all my adventurous college friends are traveling the world and living in different countries, and all my high school friends were buying homes and starting families and making 6-figure incomes, and here I was about to commit to yet another 3+ years of my life to medicine for barely any pay. Like, we were making $50K a year. And I remember comparing my life to theirs and feeling so far behind. And it's hard for people on the outside looking in to empathize with us and what we're going through. So I spent many nights talking to someone who would actually understand, and that was my little brother, Matty, who at the time was also in medical school. And I remember thinking, how can I catch up? And how can I make up for all the years of not having worked and med school loans? And then it hit me that I didn't need to wait until I actually had my MD to actually start using my medical knowledge. So Matty and I went back and forth about it for a little bit, and eventually we decided to start creative work online while I was in residency and while he was in medical school. And that's how Mike and Matty started. And since then, it's changed our lives, being able to connect with you and others like us through our videos and our music. Being a resident is kind of like being the middle child. We have attendings ahead of us and we have med students behind us. And in America, residents have finished medical school and we have our MDs. So at that time, I was technically a doctor, but I felt like I knew nothing.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
She's right, you don't.
A medical student is kind of like a squire to the resident, who is kind of like the knight. And as a knight, you're in the front lines, you're taking responsibility, and you're making decisions. And you still have to teach your squires, but you also have to answer to the king, which is your supervising attending. And that's all the Game of Thrones analogy I got for you. So historically, resident doctors would reside in or near the hospital and be on call like every other day or so. And while most jobs are the typical 9 to 5, the hospital is always open. So we frequently worked nights, and some of the most difficult learning experiences happened in those late night hours. So as an aspiring hospital physician, I had two main roles. First was deciding which patients needed to stay in the hospital and which ones could go home. And I don't know why, but the sickest patients would always come in at like 2 in the morning, crashing, dying, and it was up to us to stabilize them. So I still remember this patient vividly in my mind. It was my second year of residency. He was this homeless guy, meth addict, and the police found him in the public park, lying face down in the mud, and they rushed him to the emergency room. So I was called down to admit him to the hospital and stabilize him. And this guy was infested with maggots. Like, you could see the worms like burrowed in his skin. I still remember the smell too. For stinky patients, we would take these 2 face masks and we would spread mint toothpaste on them, and we would put them together like a peanut butter sandwich, and we'd wear them on our face in order to block out the smell. But in this case, it just wasn't enough. Who knows how many hours or how many days this guy was out for. I had to intubate him and put a central line, and I remember while I was doing the procedures, I could see little fleas just jumping all over him, and it still makes me itchy just thinking about it. But that aside, some of these patients were seriously sick, and when you're a resident working late at night and your supervising attending is at home sleeping, it gets kind of nerve-wracking. But we didn't train all those years for nothing, and I found that the more difficult situations I was able to overcome, the more confidence I gained, and it was just this endless loop of positive feedback, of learning and growth. The second main role that we had as internal medicine residents was responding to codes in the hospital. Again, I don't know why, but these codes always seem to happen at like 4 in the morning or something. The worst kind of code is a code blue, which is when the patient's heart stops beating, they've basically died, and we have to rush to the bedside and try to revive them with CPR, chest compressions, electric shocks, and whatever else. And one of the toughest situations I had during training was during my 3rd year of residency. It was this really sick lady who went into cardiac arrest, it was code blue, and we initiated CPR, and it seemed futile. But the patient's daughters stuck by her side and refused to leave the room, and they refused to let us stop CPR. I mean, at that point, the patient was on her way out, but we were prolonging her suffering. And it still haunts me to this day, because despite the daughters threatening me, I had to consider the patient's best interests and stop CPR and allow her to pass peacefully. I remember that morning, I felt so defeated, but all the attendings and all the other residents, they had heard about what happened that night, and they all sent me messages and kind words reassuring me that I had done the right thing. And in that moment, I felt so supported by the medical community around me. In the last months of residency training, the coronavirus pandemic hit, and it wasn't like anything we've ever trained for. We all picked up extra shifts in the ICU to help out, but due to the social distancing and all of our teaching sessions being canceled, we became more distant from our co-residents and from each other. Residency graduation just kind of passed us by. No celebrations, no big parties. It was quiet and lonely. So I took my medical boards that summer, became a board-certified internal medicine physician, applied for and got my dream job, and just started working. And I'm breezing through this part in my timeline because that's how it felt to me. It was all just kind of a blur. I don't think I even celebrated finally landing my first job ever in the workforce. I mean, I guess no one was really celebrating. Everything was closed from COVID. I just dove headfirst into the fray. I was a frontline doctor working my first year during the peak of the second wave of COVID. This was October, November, December, and it was in Los Angeles, basically COVID central. And I remember the first wave wasn't even done yet, and the George Floyd incident had just happened, and protests were going on, virus was spreading, and hospitals were overflowing. The toughest part was seeing so many people die from COVID in the hospital, scared, alone, and without any family at their bedside. It was even tougher explaining to the family members that they couldn't come see their grandma or grandpa for the last time. And there was this one particular patient, I'll never forget him because he was one of my first COVID patients. He had COVID pneumonia, basically on his deathbed. We got to talking, and he told me that he spent his entire life working a 9-to-5 job, and this was his first year in retirement. And he told me about all his plans, his vacations, seeing his grandkids. He worked all his life with the dream of one day retiring and living the good life. Unexpectedly, he caught COVID. And on his deathbed, he told me about his regrets, that he didn't need to wait until he retired to go on vacation with his wife, or to take his grandkids to Disneyland, or to start writing that book that he always wanted to write. So now that I'm a full-fledged doctor, I've made it, I've climbed to the top of the mountain, I have a job, I've essentially 6x, 7x my salary, I can finally settle in, I'm the first doctor in my family, and I remember feeling super excited at what was to come. But strangely, the excitement didn't last very long. It's kind of hard to explain the feeling, but if you've seen that Disney Pixar movie Soul, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. It's that moment where the main guy finally made it into the band. Like, he trained all his life for that moment, and he finally was accepted by the music legends. And he gets super excited for like a good minute.
You don't get many like tonight.
Yeah. So, what happens next?
We come back tomorrow night and do it all again. What's wrong, Teach?
It's just, I've been waiting on this day for my entire life. I thought I'd feel different.
You can see the look on his face, like you can tell he was waiting for some epic finale. Like, he had worked all his life and didn't allow himself to be happy until he had accomplished his dream. But there was no epic finale. And that's how I felt. And it was just so weird. I had climbed to the top of my mountain, and I was expecting it to make me happy, and it did, but the happiness was so momentary, and my soul just moved on and it wanted to find the next thing to chase. At that moment, I realized that being on top of the mountain wasn't as fun and it wasn't as fulfilling as when I was actually climbing the mountain. And I was so fixated on the destination that I lost sight of all the good times I had on the journey. But now that I'm sitting here and reflecting on the past 10 years of my life, I realized that the happiness and fulfillment, it was right there in front of my face the entire time. I mean, how many times during this video did you hear me talk about my love for learning and how it inspired me through tough times? So what can I say? it doesn't really matter what career path you decide to take. Doctor, lawyer, gamer, musician, astronaut, like, it doesn't really matter which mountain you choose to climb. Just focus on climbing. Focus on all the cool stuff that you get to learn. Focus on the relationships and human connections that you build on the way, and focus on enjoying the ride, because once you get to the top, you're just gonna wanna climb the next mountain, and then there's the next one after that. But everything that you gain on the way, that stays with you forever.